look up any particular subject you're interested in, or you can also search by a keyword and find what you're interested in. And we just keep doing this because there is so much scientific work that's being done that shows the wrong-headedness of this other side, the climate alarmist side. We find that most of the climatic catastrophes that they are predicting that are going to occur with global warming are not getting any worse, as the Earth indeed has warmed over the last century or so.
Hasn't it recently cooled?
About the last 10 years or so, there has been a very, very slight cooling of the planet. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the models all suggest that it should be rising. It should be continuing to warm. But the Earth is a very complex place. There are many processes that determine the ultimate change in temperature due to a change in the CO2 content of the atmosphere. There is a propensity to cause the temperature to rise, but there are many things that happen consequently and in response to this. Some give a positive feedback, and some of these other things that occur give negative feedback. So there are some things that would tend to enhance the CO2 propensity for warming, and others that would tend to reduce it. And all of the evidence from the real world suggests that these negative feedbacks predominate, so that there is not any real compelling reason to believe that the Earth will necessarily warm at all due to an increase in the air's CO2 content because of these negative feedbacks that can occur. I have done a lot of looking at what I call natural experiments, where you look at something that occurs in the real world, like a change in radiative forcing of the atmosphere, and you look at how the temperature changes. And I think I've had about 10 different experiments of this nature, maybe it was 8, and they all indicate that if you had a 300 to 600 part per million doubling of the air's CO2 content, you would probably only increase the temperature of the planet by about 0.4 of a degree centigrade, whereas climate alarmists give you a figure that's about 10 times that great. Another interesting thing about it is that, they're always worried about it getting so warm. We've just come out of a period of time called the Little Ice Age, which lasted right up until about the beginning of the 20th century. And this was the coldest period of the current interglacial. It's the coldest period of the current interglacial, and the current interglacial has been cooler than the prior several interglacials. So we're at an extremely low temperature, relatively speaking, to what the Earth has been for just a tremendously long time, and it's not unusual at all for it to be warming at this time just due to recovering from that extremely cold period.
Why is it that there are any scientists in the world who are aligning with a false scenario, a false story about carbon? Why does even one scientist willing to say that carbon is the cause? How can they face themselves?
Well, I think like anything, there's usually a spectrum of people with a spectrum of views, even in different camps, as you might say. Like, we're often referred to as the climate skeptics by their side, and we often term them the climate alarmists. But I think that within each side, you also have a spectrum of thought, and I am sure that there are some that honestly believe that CO2 is going to do what they're saying it's going to do.
But how can they believe it if science is about proving things? How can they call upon belief rather than the studies and say that?
Well, I don't know. That'd be a good question to ask them. Sometimes I wonder myself. But their belief, let us say, is based pretty much on these models of the atmosphere which they create. And I don't know. I guess it's like if you have a child and you kind of want to believe in your child, that's kind of like maybe where they're coming from. But I guess I really shouldn't put words in their mouth. But I tend to disbelieve their results because they are purely theoretical, and they could easily be wrong. Because think about it. In order to be correct, they have to be correctly characterizing in their mathematical models all processes in the natural world that may have an impact on the climate. And I tell you, there are a lot of processes that go on in the real world that are probably not included in those models. Some of them involve biological phenomena. There are many.
Can you name a couple?
Well, plants give off a lot of types of things into the air, various different types of gases. Some of these can be converted into particles. Some of these particles can act as cloud condensation nuclei. They can cause more and brighter clouds to be created, which would reflect more of the incoming solar radiation, which would tend to cool the planet. This happens with life forms on land and life in the ocean, in fact. And these kinds of feedback are very complex, and the models do not include all of these things. And then there could well be things that we don't even know about that would obviously not be included in the models. I think it's kind of, I don't know what's the word, unrealistic to think that the models include everything of significance to the climate. I'm sure there are things we don't know about that aren't in there, and there are other things that we do know about that are not in there, too. And so, I look at how the natural world responds to various perturbations that could cause its temperature to change, and I get a result that's only about a tenth as large as what the models get. And then I also look, another kind of thing that can be looked at is if you go back in time about 1,000 years, you find that there was a period called the medieval warm period, because it occurred in medieval times, and it was warm. It was at least as warm, if not warmer, than what it is right now on the Earth. One of the things we do on our website, we scan the scientific literature, and there is so much work that is done just in this field alone that we can report the results of a different scientific study every single week dealing with the temperature of the medieval warm period. And we do this on our website, and we've been doing it now for, I don't know, maybe a couple of years or so, every single week. And we look at these paleo temperature studies, and those that are good enough to get actual temperatures out of them, the vast bulk of them show that it was warmer back then than it is now, when there was way less CO2 in the air than there is now, indicating that something other than CO2 caused the planet to be as warm or warmer than it is now.
What do you think of radiation? There's several types of radiation that aren't even on the table in the climate dialogue throughout the world. Number one, microwave radiation. Number two, solar radiation that gets into Earth's atmosphere. And number three, which is a completely separate thing, but there are a lot of planes spraying aerosol into our upper atmosphere all over the world that are spotted. Not one of these things I'm mentioning to you has ever been on the equation or on the table in the talk about climate and climate change, climate weather, or climate itself.
Well, actually, a lot of those things are. They deal with solar radiation. They deal with long-wave thermal radiation. They'll look at various other parts of the spectrum, too, and they do deal with a lot of that.
Who's they?
The climate modelers.
Oh, but I've never heard it in the dialogue as impacting impacting climate. In other words, as even a factor that could impact climate. I've never heard it ever publicly spoken about, that radiation or solar rays or anything like that would have a potential serious impact on our climate system and weather in particular. I've never heard it. I'm not saying...
Well, they do deal with these various types of radiation.
Right. I'm talking about the IPCC.
They would be dealing with it, too. But normally, let's say like solar radiation.
Right.
They feel that the variability of solar radiation is not large enough to be able to explain the amount of warming that's happening